David Bowman, the Executive Director for the Four Corners Regional Education Cooperative #1. And a few years back, I had the opportunity to design and direct a reading intervention program, the 6 components reading approach, across New Mexico. And I know what kind of results we got from it. I know how powerful it was for helping kids significantly improve their reading ability and teachers to improve their reading instruction. So I'm very pleased that we have the opportunity to bring this approach back to New Mexico. A few minutes and let's talk about it. Okay, so first of all, what is SCRA? It's an explicit, systematic approach based on research focused on kids' needs to help them to develop their skill set in each of the reading components: oral language, phonemic awareness, fluency, phonics, vocabulary, comprehension, the 6 components. When we implemented it through the Three Rivers Education Foundation, we ran the program for 4.5 years. It was implemented in 45 school districts across New Mexico. We served more than 12,000 students, K-12, and we had more than 1,600 teachers who served as tutors in this program, who received the training and the support and so forth in implementing SCRA. So we have a lot of history, and we have a lot of data points to help us understand what does this program actually do. So here's a quick map, shows where we were, plus some areas in other states. When we look at the data on the program, the data are limited specifically to what happened in New Mexico with New Mexico kids. So that's what we did. The big question, though, is what did we get for it? What were the results? So first, the student population, as expected, it's really clustered around the 1st through 4th grades and then dwindles on down. Not a lot of kids at the high school, but enough at least over 4.5 years to come up with some valid findings. When we looked at kids pre-test, because they all get pre-tested at the very beginning, what we found was that with these students, each year, they were getting farther and farther behind their expected reading levels. So we call that the reading gap. Basically, how far behind are they? Interestingly, if we look at their reading levels, not how many grades behind they are, but what's their actual level, what we find is that kids top out right about the 4th grade, which means a couple things. One, past that point, kids are simply not getting instruction in reading. The second thing it means is that those fundamental skills that they should have learned in the early grades, they didn't learn them, and it's prohibiting them from making progress towards more advanced and higher expectations. So that's pre-test. Then, if we look at the post-test, what we find is that those reading gaps were very substantially decreased. So, for example, 7th grade, kids were 4 grade levels behind, but by the end of the program, they were only 1.8 grade levels behind. Now, you might be thinking, well, gosh, that's great, but they're not on grade level. Well, to be honest, those 7th grade kids would have to make, in a single semester, a 4 grade level jump. It's just not going to happen. And maybe it doesn't need to happen either, because what we're really doing is making sure that students have those kinds of skills necessary that will set them back on path to making those grade level expectations. So if we calculate what's the difference pre-post, how much growth did they make, what we find is at the elementary level they're typically making 1 or a little better than 1 grade level's growth in a semester. And then in the upper grades, obviously much more, all the way up to 4.5 grade level jump in the 12th grade. These kids are back on path to getting to grade level expectation because we've done something substantially important. We've helped them to develop those foundational skills across the reading components that are necessary to begin to advance to meet those grade level expectations. So these results are fantastic, right? And we're only talking about a single semester here, far better than a full year's growth in less than half a year's time. And these are the data. They are what they are. So that's kids. So one of the things we wanted to know, though, is what effect is this having on the teachers? I mean, they're getting training, they're getting coaching, they're getting resources, and we heard from many of them that, wow, I feel like I'm a much better teacher because I've been a tutor in this program. So we surveyed them, and we surveyed their principals also. We asked three things. Is the teacher's knowledge of reading improved? Is their reading instruction improved? And overall, are they a better teacher? The response was overwhelmingly positive. So we knew something was happening here. Even though those are fairly subjective, we knew there's probably an effect. Could we look at it? So what we did is we partnered up with 4 districts, 2 small, a medium, and a large district. And we looked at their 3rd grade state assessment scores for their kids, 3rd grade ELA scores. And we compared 2 different groups of kids. We looked at those scores for kids whose teachers were a tutor, and we looked at those kids for teachers who were not tutors. Now, I took out anybody that had received tutoring. Any kid that received tutoring was not in that data pool. We're not looking at the effect of tutoring. We want to know, is there a difference because of the teacher? So that's what we looked at. And as it turns out, there was a very true effect occurring here. So, for example, in the 2 small districts, on average, kids whose teachers were tutors were performing 0.65 and 0.5 ELA levels higher than their peers in non-tutors classrooms. Even at the medium district, we saw the effect. Now, interestingly, for those 3 districts, the data set was limited to those schools where we had tutoring. But then there's that large district up there. In the large district, the data set came from across the entire district, not just those schools where we had tutoring, but all the schools, which means the kids in these generally lower performing schools that use this program were being compared against kids in higher performing schools as well. And they still outperformed their peers in non-tutors classrooms. What does that mean? Well, we designed this program. We looked at the research, dug through the reading, the subgroups of the reading panels. They said, here's what works and here's how kids learn and so forth. We dug through what works clearinghouse for those activities and those strategies that have large effect sizes. We did that to help the kids, but it turns out that serving as a tutor in the SCRA model is effective professional development that has a direct relationship to improvements in students' achievements on the state assessment scores. Turns out SCRA is not just good for kids, but is also a very strong professional development model. So super exciting. And in part of it is this issue right here. Is it a curriculum or is it an approach? When I designed SCRA, I very specifically stripped away those supports that teachers often have, namely their curriculum. We didn't give them a curriculum. We didn't give them a reading list. We didn't give them a set of activities that they must follow. We didn't tell them that now you have to teach your kid X, Y, and Z. That's what happens in the classrooms, right? Where teachers are expected to implement their district-adopted curriculum. For these kids who are struggling, it's obviously not working. So instead, we focused on an approach, and the approach is based on the premise that students have different learning needs and that the instruction should match what the student needs. So it turns out that this model, not focus on a curriculum, but focus on an approach, turned out to be more effective for the kids receiving tutoring. So one of the things we can do is we can estimate approximately what is the expected natural growth and achievement. We can look at the incoming scores for kids in one grade level and in the fall scores for the next grade level, and that'll give us a rough estimate of about how much growth do kids naturally make. And then we can say approximately half of it each semester. Okay, so we can estimate how much growth would kids be expected to make in a semester. And then we can compare that to how much growth did they actually make when they were involved in SCRA. And from there, what percentage of growth comes from classroom instruction? What percentage of growth comes from SCRA? And what we found at each grade level is the growth resulting from the tutoring model was far outpaced the growth that came from what was happening in the classroom. The classrooms were implementing the curriculum, and as you see in the blue boxes, it had some effect. But the effect from participating in this intervention was far stronger than what was happening in the classrooms. So just doing more of the classroom wasn't helping these kids. This model came in and provided them what they actually needed in order to make meaningful, accelerated growth in their reading skills. So we approach the approach. What is the approach? What does it actually look like? So first of all, kids receive the intervention in small groups, not one-on-one, not medium, large groups, and so forth. It's small groups. It comes straight from the National Reading Panel subgroups. It says this is the most effective size, and it kind of makes sense because the most effective strategies are implemented in a small group setting. All right. The instruction was only two sessions per week, about 1 hour per session. So we're only talking, a couple of hours a week, and yet it was still far more powerful than what kids were receiving in their classrooms. We'll talk about this more in a moment, but we emphasize the necessity of providing instruction in every reading component every week. And we also help the tutors to understand and implement those research strategies that have shown the strongest effect sizes. And of course, pre and post testing, we need an estimate of what kids can do at the beginning to help guide us in our instruction, and then at the end, what did we actually accomplish. We also focus on an integrated approach to instruction. So we're not going to be providing instruction in single components at a time, but there are very logical ways and meaningful ways to combine them together, and that's what we help the tutors to understand and design. We also focus on next step learning. We can talk about grade level skills. 6th grade kid, let's teach him 6th grade stuff. But if that kid is 3 grade levels behind, he needs the 3rd grade stuff first, then the 4th grade stuff, then the 5th grade. He'll get there, but only if we can build up those skills necessary to acquire the grade level skills. So we focus on the next step, zones of proximal development. We also focus on immediate application. We're learning, we're using. We're learning, we're using. And as you'll see, this model fits exactly the structured literacy approach. But let's take a moment and talk about 6 components. Why is it important? Why are we going to do phonemic awareness with middle school kids? Aren't they too old for that? Well, not necessarily, because obviously there are gaps in those foundational skills that are prohibiting growth and accessing the higher skills. So we have to make sure that kids have a chance to learn them as well. So I spent 1 semester and I looked at every single instructional report from the tutors, and I grouped them and said, okay, the whole program was implemented exactly right, and they provided instruction in every component every week. Here's Group B, everything exactly right, program perfect, except they did not provide the instruction in every component every week. Is there a difference in their student outcomes? And it turns out there's a difference, and it's substantial. All the way up to the maximum number of hours that kids were receiving, we're talking about 0.7 grade level difference. Well, you might say, well, 0.68, that's pretty good in a semester. But I'm going to counter and say, yes, that's good. 1.37 is better. That's what we're shooting for, and that's why we emphasize all 6 components. So what do we do? What do we bring to the table to help implement this at your schools? So first, everybody gets training every semester, minimum of 3 hours. If they're do it for 2 semesters and come back the next semester, they're going to get a 3-hour training again, but probably phase 2. We also provide coaching twice monthly for the teachers that are implementing this approach. So if you've got 6 tutors, then the literacy coach is going to come to that school twice a month, meet with those tutors, help them to refine and deepen their understanding of the strategies, help them look at instructional reports, integrate components, all of those things. So that will happen twice a month. But then on a monthly basis, we're also going to look at every single instructional report. What are they doing? Are they addressing all 6? Is there a mismatch between what they think they're doing and what they're actually doing? The results of this review go back to the local coach, coordinator, who then works with the teachers in those semi-monthly sessions. And then we're going to look at the data every semester. What happened? What did we learn? Where are the strong points? Where are the areas where we need to strengthen the program further? So we're going to look very closely at what's actually occurring. And then there are some other types of resources, instructional guides, sample activities, videos, and things like that, that teachers can use on an as-needed basis to help them to develop their instructional plans. So, the structured literacy approach. So if we look at the 6 elements within structured literacy, phonology on down, what we see is they map back specifically to those reading components. And that by providing the instruction in each of those reading components, we are addressing each element of the structured literacy approach. And the same thing for the instructional principles as well. The strategies that we espouse, because they work, are going to fit exactly one-to-one with those principles espoused through structured literacy. Explicit, yes. Diagnostic, yes. Multisensory, yes. Each of those principles is implemented through SCRA. And the same thing with letters. It's interesting. Letters draws from the exact same research base that SCRA comes out of. The exact thing. Same components, same definitions, same ways to implement and help kids to raise their achievement in those areas. SCRA puts a stronger emphasis on the strategies and the activities, which is more what letters does, with the idea that if teachers have a firm grasp of effective strategies, they can then create the activities that are appropriate for particular groups. So it's more about the teacher's knowledge base than things you can do. There's also a strong emphasis on the next step learning as discussed. We built the whole structure, the time, the group size, and so forth, and then just built into the model itself is the coaching and training. So there's a very strong overlap between them. We've got the evidence that says this is going to work with New Mexico kids, and it's going to affect their ELA scores and teacher performance and so forth. But if you're thinking, well, letters, SCRA, this is going to get us to the same point, and potentially because it's more of a structured approach, it's got a method for implementation at the school level. So some things districts need to know. So if you're going to bring this into your school, then we're going to ask you to sign some assurances, which are things like kids won't be assigned to tutoring because they've been naughty, or teachers will implement all 6 reading components weekly, or we will set aside the time and the space for this to happen. We will assist with tutor and student assignment as necessary. We'll send out the regional coach who can come and sit with your school folks and actually determine how our kids going to be structured. There is a data sharing requirement. If you're already using iReady, we're going to need access to that because we use that as pre-post statewide. If not, we'll provide the licenses for it. Also, the state assessment data with the appropriate safeguards around students' identity and even teachers' identity and so forth. But this lets us gauge what's actually happening with teachers and the effect on teachers. So what does it cost per school? $12,900. Doesn't matter how many kids, doesn't matter how many teachers, $12,900 per year, per school. All right, so the last word is this, and I'd be remiss not to say this. We've looked at a lot of numbers. We've quantified a lot, but it's not just the numbers, because in a very real part, it's also what are kids' self-perception, and what do kids think about learning and themselves as learners. And teachers, what do they think about themselves as teachers, because teachers are human too. So from teachers, what we hear is that they feel very enthusiastic. They feel reinvigorated. They feel like they've got better relationships with teachers. They're getting back the reason why they went into teaching, which is to work closely with kids, help them find those aha moments, and know that they contributed to student success. When we think about kids, I listen to the parents very, very closely. I've got the letters and the emails and so forth, the testimonials from parents. And what they're telling me overwhelmingly is kids like learning again, that they're getting re-engaged in school, that their self-confidence is increasing, that their happiness is increasing, that they're more likely to take risks within the classroom, that they feel better about themselves as learners because suddenly they're learning again. And that will have a strong effect on them no matter what they're doing, not just reading, but in every area of their life. So that's components reading approach. And we've seen the data, we've seen how it works. If you're interested in bringing this into your districts and into your schools, well, let's talk about it and let's start getting it set up so that together we can help students significantly improve their reading achievement and help teachers begin to make necessary improvements in their ability to provide reading instruction. So again, I'm David Bowman with the Four Corners Regional Education Cooperative. Have a good day. I look forward to hearing from you.